Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on the park fire. Throughout this video, we're going to be focusing on what I would say are still my top 3 concerns on this fire. One is going to be Butte Meadows, which is right to the east of the fire, and we do have that firing operation there. That's going to be something we're talking about. And then we also have Mineral up to the northeast of the fire. The reason that's a concern is because there's a lot of fuels that haven't burnt out in decades between Mineral and where we have seen the largest amount of heat on the fire. All those red stars represent where some of the more recent heat detections have been. And we do have southwesterly winds that are going to try to push that heat towards Mineral throughout the day today. Although good news, winds should be actually calmer than they were yesterday. And then finally, number 3 concern is going to be Manton and Shingletown up here. You notice not seeing as many of those red stars on the northern half of this map, which means not as much heat on the northern part of the fire, but we did have some spot fires around Inskip Hill yesterday. So that's still, I'd say, number 3, but in places like Chico, Paradise, Magalia, Forest Ranch, actually looking great on the southern end of this fire. And I believe even some of the evacuation warnings and orders have been downgraded in the last 24 hours. So before we go through those top 3 concerns, we maybe should just take a look at the most current numbers that we have to work with. We have 383,000 acres. So in the context of California wildfires, the park fire is now the number 5 largest wildfire in recorded California history. And you also unfortunately see that number has increased as well. So structures destroyed is now up to 192. The reason that jumped up about 90 structures in the last 24 hours isn't so much because we had 90 structures destroyed yesterday, but it's more likely that they're able to get into some of those areas, like perhaps Cohasset in here, and just do more damage inspection. So not new structures destroyed, just new inspections are the reason that number went up. And then other numbers, this is where some of the good news comes in. And I've said that, it seems like I keep saying this on fires in California, but I believe that is the largest amount of personnel I've ever seen on a fire, 5,500. I'm going to have to remember that number right there. That's basically a little army on this fire. 41 helicopters, almost 500 engines, 100 crews. Pretty amazing right there, and we can actually see that they have those aircraft already at work right now, especially on that northern edge where we did have some of those spot fires yesterday. So now I think that actually one thing we can do, I have a new map to show for that helps us understand that acreage number there, 383,000. So we can come over here to the progression map, and you see how much happened in the first few days of this fire. So your red is going to be your more recent growth. Your blue, your green, blue, and purple is going to be the first few days of the fire. So that purple is basically that 45,000 acres that burned overnight that first day. And then the southerly winds quickly pushed this another 10 to 15 miles to the north. And then the southerly winds continued, pushed it another 10 to 15 miles towards the north. And that was all just in a matter of a few days. And then as we've seen those resource numbers jump up, and then we had the cool down this weekend, especially on Saturday. More cool air moved in, more moisture moved in, and our winds have calmed down as well. So we haven't seen nearly as much growth over the last 2 days. That's going to be more your yellow, your orange, and your red. Now, one thing I do want to point out, though, the perimeters that we're going to be looking at today aren't showing a lot of the growth that we did have yesterday afternoon. So there should actually be more red on this map than we're seeing. The reason we know that is because if we come down to this chart right here, so it's actually a pretty cool chart. It shows the date, the time that we got that data from, and then how many new acreage burned that day. So 7/25, you can see we added 45,000 acres. And then another big day was when we had that new perimeter update, kind of 7/25 or July 25th, more at night. And that was another 53,000 acres. Also, July 26th, we added a lot of acreage there. And then notice yesterday it's saying plus 10,000, but the timestamp is from 12/14. And as you know, most of your fire growth is always going to be between about 3 to 5 p.m. in the afternoon. And I mean, we were doing a 2.5 hour live stream last night, and it was still fairly active around 7:30 to 8 p.m. But then luckily the winds calmed down overnight and we had some decent relative humidity recoveries. So I believe they were able to get in there and actually do another firing operation to the west of Butte Meadows. And yeah, maybe that's a good transition into Butte Meadows, because again, that is, I would say, still my top concern on this fire, just because of how close it is to where we have had some of that heat activity recently. Let's go Butte Meadows we'll just go to the most recent fire perimeter, showing about 2.5 miles there. But if we turn it on to fire perimeters, because that's a little confusing to look at right there. And I believe you can see 32 right there if you look closely. I want to see how close it is to 32. So that's going to be, about 2.2 miles. So that's still a decent amount of space between the fire and Butte Meadows. And another thing that's working for us, you can see that firing operation right there. So that's where they took advantage of some of the cooler conditions we had this weekend, and they basically burnt it out right along 32. I think this map shows it the best right here. So you see Butte Meadows down here. 32 is that dark red line that comes down. Basically, light fire, clear out those fuels. So then if the fire gets closer towards 32, then it stops because, it has no fuel to basically consume, because that fuel has already been burnt out on purpose when conditions were cooler and calmer. And then what I did learn in the briefing that I listened to this morning, so you see that opening right there. That's one of the main things that we were worried about yesterday. And we saw some heat activity in this part of the fire yesterday. And then we saw helicopters doing continual drops right around here to try to keep the fire west of 32. But what I heard in the briefing this morning is that I believe they were able to take advantage of some of the cooler conditions overnight last night. The winds really calmed down last night as well. And it sounds like they've been trying to complete this firing operation to tie it into the fire perimeter, which would basically create an entire barrier along 32 between the most active part of the fire and Butte Meadows. So again, we don't have the most recent fire perimeter to reflect if that firing operation actually happened and was successful, and how much this filled in yesterday, but that's pretty good news there for Butte Meadows. I would say the other good news is that the winds are going to be a bit more westerly today. So actually that's the bad news, because if you're Butte Meadows, you would want a very southerly wind to push this fire up towards the north. So the wind shifting slightly more westerly today is going to kind of lead to more northeasterly or even easterly growth on this fire. But where the good news comes in is that the winds aren't going to be as strong as previous days, about 5 miles per hour less than yesterday. And yesterday only had about 15 to 20 mile per hour gusts. So we're seeing some winds around 15 miles per hour today. And the other thing that helps us is we had a better moisture recovery last night. So what I'm thinking about combining those two things together is the main reason winds can be a problem, especially on this side where we have this great firing operation right along 32, is winds can pick up burning embers, toss them over that firing operation into all these fuels that haven't burnt out in maybe 20, 30 years in some cases on this fire, and even more than that in some parts of the fire. So winds pick up burning embers, drop it in the dry fuels, create spot fires, and then all of a sudden that firing operation basically doesn't help you because it's able to just leapfrog over it. Now the reason that calmer winds are good is because then it's picking up less burning embers. And then also the reason the moisture recovery is good is because as you have more moisture in your fuels, it's harder for those burning embers, even if they were to get tossed over 32, to create a spot fire. So that was a lot of words right there talking about Butte Meadows. But the basic summary is we have that firing operation in there. It sounds like they've been able to tie it in. And if we look at the heat detections from yesterday, although, actually let's just go MODIS and VIIRS for the time being. Those yellow boxes show that there is still some heat coming off of that part of the fire, but I mean, it actually might be good heat. It might be heat from the firing operation. But look at all the red stars in there. So that tells us that this fire perimeter is most likely incomplete. Remember, it's from around 12 yesterday afternoon, and we most likely did see that fill in yesterday. So that's why it's so amazing that they did that firing operation when they did. It's because otherwise there would have been a much better chance that it would have jumped over 32 yesterday, and a much better chance that it would do that today. But I mean, right now, it's looking like they're going to hold it to the west of 32. I don't want to jinx it, but with the amount of aircraft that we have on this fire right now, with that firing operation, with the fact that the winds are calmer today, we are looking a lot better in this portion of the fire than we were previously. So although Butte Meadows is still my number one concern because it is just so close to the fire, I'd say there's some silver lining that we can go off of there. Now the next, or number two concern, is going to be mineral up here. You see that cluster of structures? I think this map shows mineral the best. So you see mineral right there, right along 36. They have kept the fire to the south of 36 on this northeastern corner. And you know, while we're there, we can just talk about Sky Ranch as well. That's going to be, can't really see it as well on that map. So let's zoom in here, go back to fire perimeter. Just a quick detour for mineral. There's Sky Ranch. Sky Ranch might actually be one of the safest places in California now, because I probably shouldn't say that while we're during a fire, but if you look at fire history, we have the Ponderosa fire from 2012 to the north of Sky Ranch, and then we've had the Park Fire go all the way around Sky Ranch. So now they just have fuels cleared out in every direction around them, and since the winds are from the southwest today, not too worried about it moving back in over Sky Ranch, because it's actually going to continue to push some of the recent heat away from Sky Ranch. But that's where some of the concerns come in for mineral, because when you look at this map right here, this basically sums up the dangers to mineral, which is, again, we have some distance between where we have some of those heat detections and mineral. That's going to be about 7.5 miles. I would be amazed if the fire was able to move 7.5 miles today with only 15-mile-per-hour winds. Maybe if we had the winds that we had last Friday where it was 30-mile-per-hour winds, but I'd be surprised if it pushed all the way up there. Now, with that being said, the northeastern side of the fire was the most active portion of the fire yesterday. You see all that red right there? That's where our more recent heat detections are from. And the other thing working against us for mineral is those fuels. You notice you don't have any burn scars between those heat detections and mineral. So that's going to be fuels that haven't burnt out in decades. And then when we put this afternoon's wind forecast on it, it looks like those winds are basically going straight from where we have the largest amount of heat on this fire to mineral. So those winds are going to try to push the fire towards the northeast. We have dry, abundant fuels. That is the area of the fire where I am predicting the most growth throughout the day today. The question is just how much we get. It certainly helps us that those winds aren't going to be all that strong. Now, one other thing that we have to look at for mineral is in here we have Mill Creek. And you look at this canyon right here. You can just see how deep that canyon is. And then we have mineral up to the north of that canyon. So the reason canyons are important on fire is because it can funnel your winds. It's almost like when you put your finger over the end of a hose and then that starts going faster. It's basically what your winds or your canyons can do with winds in the afternoon. And winds like to go up canyon in the afternoon. So one of the places I'm thinking we could see the largest amount of growth on this northeastern side would be up this canyon, because that might be a place where it's not just 15-mile-per-hour winds. Maybe we get some 20-mile-per-hour winds because we have that topographic influence. But what helps us a little bit is, let's clean up this map a little bit, turn off the winds. You can see the canyon on this map right here, but you can also see that we had the Mill Fire in 2012. Now, 2012 is long enough ago that we might have had some fuels grow back since then, so I'm not sure how much that burn scar would actually help us. But having a burn scar in a canyon between the fire and where that canyon will be able to funnel up some of that some of that fire closer towards mineral, and it could help us. What's more likely, though, is that the largest danger to mineral is actually not going to be from that canyon. It's just going to be from that heat right there. And then the southwesterly winds that are basically pushing one of the most active parts of the fire directly towards mineral. And we can see that it is the most active part of the fire even right now. Where that black is, I'll point out the direction the smoke is going right now actually looks to be more northerly on the northern half of the fire, but you're starting to see a bit of that southwesterly component come in on the eastern side, and then yesterday afternoon it turned more westerly, and we're expecting that to happen once again today. I think what I was trying to show on this graphic, though, is going to be easier to see on this, where that black right there is our fire perimeter. And then right there where you have the smoke coming off and where you have some of that orange showing up, that shows where the most active part of the perimeter is right now. With that being said, not bad compared to some of the previous days we've seen on the fire. It's 11:30 right now, and to have that little smoke coming off of it, I would say is a pretty good sign and is maybe an indication of how the lack of winds out there are helping us. I mean, if we look at some of the weather stations that are actually on the ground, the black numbers are going to be your temperatures. So you can see a lot of 70s, looks like a 79 just south of Manton, which we'll talk about in a second. But the one that I'm really excited about is that red number right there. The red numbers represent your winds, and those winds are around 5 to maybe, that's to the east of the fire. Yeah, it's about 5 to 10 miles per hour right now. That is much better than some of the 20 to 25 mile per hour winds we had even during the overnight hours in previous days. So eastern side of the fire does look the most active. The only camera I could really find that showed the eastern side of the fire is this one from Colby Mountain, where, I mean, this does make it look a bit more active when you're actually seeing the fire from the ground. I will just say it doesn't look as active as previous days. And notice that little wind shift right there. So this is looking, wow, this actually just perfectly showed the wind shift that we were seeing on the satellite imagery. Notice how the wind is almost going straight north earlier. So we're looking from the east at the fire. And then watch as these winds start to shift around directly towards where the camera is. That's going to represent the winds shifting a bit more southwesterly. So looking at that on this map, zooming in, at first going north, and then it starts to shift a bit more towards the northeast later in that little satellite loop. So interesting to see there. That basically just goes along with what we're saying about how the winds are going to be a bit more southwest throughout the day today. Now up in the northern section of the fire, that's where I do still have some concern about Manton and Shingletown. I would just say not as much of a concern as previous days. So Manton's going to be that cluster of structures there, Shingletown right there. Yesterday we did have some spot fires. You can actually kind of see those orange dots right there, although again, this isn't the most current fire perimeter, and those spot fires routine about 4 to 8 p.m. is when we're starting to see it. It did cross that road right there. I forget what that road is called. I forgot it like 3 times in the live stream yesterday. I believe it's Lanes Valley Road. So zooming in here, yeah, Lanes Valley Road. That was where the spot fires went over on this northern side yesterday. We actually have the video of it where you can see some of these different spots popping up. There is, I heard, over 10 different spot fires. This is the view from Inskip Hill, and then it's going to kind of zoom over here in a second. And then we did have a decent amount of smoke coming off of it. At one point, a couple new little spot fires starting just to the east of that larger one, grew from about 30 acres to 200 acres. And at this point, I was pretty concerned about this because when you look here, we come back to Cal Topo, and you look at where Manton is, where Shingletown is, where our wind direction, it was basically the same wind direction yesterday, so spot fire right around here, winds pushing directly towards Manton and Shingletown, And then if we turn winds off and then turn fire history on, also no fire history between where those spot fires were. That was pretty concerning, especially because that's similar fuel to what we'd seen in the past where the fire just rushed through in about 4,000 to 5,000 acres per hour. So when we saw this yesterday, that was pretty concerning. But then throughout this video, you can actually see some of those retardant drops that they're doing. They basically just blasted it with air attack, and it doesn't really show it in this video as much, but by the end of the day, the smoke was greatly diminished. And a big part of the reason for that is even when this spot fire was pretty active, this imagery actually shows that it wasn't that windy out there. So when it's windy, your smoke plume is going to be a bit more bent over because the winds are basically bending that smoke. And you notice how that smoke plume goes up like that. So that's telling you that it wasn't all that windy. And yeah, we checked the weather stations yesterday and they were around 15 miles per hour, and then the winds died down significantly overnight. So still watching the northern side of the fires, do still have concerns about Manton and Shingletown, but the fact that we're not seeing that many heat detections on the north right now, and the fact that they were able to tackle those spot fires when they happened yesterday, oh, interesting. The fire perimeter just popped up to where those spot fires were on Lanes Valley Road. Hadn't noticed that previously, so I'm glad that happened in time for this video right there. So just to kind of conclude that thought, still some concerns up there, but I would say the majority of the growth today is going to be on the northeastern side of this fire. Now, a big part of that is going to depend on the weather forecast. It does look like we're slightly warmer today. Relative humidity doesn't look that dry, though. It's around 20 to 25% across the fire, which is close to normal for this time of the year. Keep in mind, last week when we were having the explosive growth on the fire, when it was going maybe 10 to 15 miles in a single day, that's when we had 25 to 30 mile per hour winds, and our relative humidity was around 10 to 15%. Forecast for today, relative humidity around 20 to 25%, and winds just 15 miles per hour. So overall, not a bad forecast today, although we are going to see some changes as we move forward. Not so much maybe with winds, but more so with temperatures. Basically, that trough that moved in over this last weekend that kind of cooled us off, that allowed them to do the firing operations, that's going to move off to the east. And then what's going to be taking its place is this big ridge right there. And that's going to take our below average temperatures and make them above average. And then it's also going to push in some monsoonal moisture. So as we get into Friday and Saturday, see how that high pressure is going to be spinning. We can actually draw on here. It's going to be spinning clockwise. So what's going to happen is it's going to take some of this air from the south and push it into California. Now that's going to do a couple things there. One, it's going to, as the ridge builds over us, it's going to take our temperatures, which across California today are below average. You see that we're in the blue. And by Saturday, or Friday and Saturday, start to see a lot more of that orange showing up, which means above average temperatures. So as things get hotter, things typically get drier, and then your fuels dry out, makes it easier for the fire to spread. One positive of when you have a big ridge like that, or a big high over California, is your winds are typically calmer until that high starts to move out, and then your winds pick up. So kind of a mixed bag there. I think where there's the largest wild card, though, is, as we talked about, that's going to be pulling in from some air from the south, and it's also going to be pulling in some moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. So see all that brown over California right now? That's because we have relatively dry air. It's normal for this time of year. But as we get into Friday and Saturday, watch this moisture start to move in. And the reason that's a wild card is because that, could potentially bring some much needed rainfall, but it could potentially bring some thunderstorms, which brings lightning, and then on top of the heat and dry fuels, could lead to some new fire starts as we get into Friday and Saturday. Now, just wanted to briefly mention that because it's something that I see on the horizon and I'm thinking about. But again, main priority right now is what's in front of us. I think we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So park fire, Again, up to about 383,000 acres, 5th largest wildfire in California. Keeping a close eye on Butte Meadows, Mineral, Manton, Shingletown throughout the day today. But again, winds calm, so that's good news there. And then also just great news on the whole southern edge of the fire for Paradise, Chico, Magalia, and Forest Ranch. So hopefully this video is helpful. If fire activity picks up this afternoon, I'll do kind of an interactive live stream where we're trying to figure out what's going on the fire together. And just thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who's been impacted by this fire, and thanks for watching.